Yes, herding cats. I hope they don't turn on any faucets. Okay, welcome to our second panel on teaching. My name is Robin Boyle. I'm from St. John's University School of Law, which is located in Queens, New York, hence the New York accent. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Sue Provenzano for helping to develop some of the ideas that you'll hear today, as well as Jane Kent Gianfrido, who unfortunately could not attend, but she also helped to develop some of the topics that you'll hear today. In preparation for this panel, I also want to thank those of you who responded to a mini survey that was sent out on the listserv this summer. It was July, we were on vacation, and yet I got a number of responses from you, so thank you very much for responding. We were asking about the Carnegie Report, which you'll hear more about, and some of the other questions. We would appreciate it if you held your questions and questions for the end, because our panelists are going to speak in order, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Our first speaker is Marilyn R. Walter from Brooklyn Law School. She's professor and director of the writing program. She teaches a variety of courses, first-year legal writing analysis and research, also fundamentals of drafting, law and literature, and employment discrimination. Her scholarship also represents variety. Most recently, she published in the Journal of LWI, using dowry death law to teach legal writing in India. I have to say the board loved this essay. She has also written on the topic of human trafficking. Marilyn's topic today is peer review as it relates to composition theory, to the Carnegie Report, to legal practice, and to the classroom. Some of our topics today are historical, and some of them are current and looking to the future. Marilyn?
I was pleased that you've already heard an introduction to my report. I want to thank Dean Floyd for talking about peer review, because that is the subject of my presentation, and to the last group of panelists who ended with the Carnegie Report, because that's where I want to begin. As many of you know, in 2007, the Carnegie Report on legal education came out as a challenge to law faculty, to have law faculty think of law school as a place where students are in a stage of apprenticeship of the mind. And our responsibility is to start them on the road towards assuming the identity of a competent and dedicated professional. As most of you know, the Carnegie Report identified three aspects of this apprenticeship. The first is the doctrinal, the intellectual, formal knowledge that students gain. And they commented that this was highly overemphasized in law schools. The second are the skills used in practice. We are not graduating theoreticians, we are graduating students who are going to become effective practitioners, and we need to help them become that. And the third is an emphasis on professional values and ethics, something that the Carnegie Report recommends become a part of every law school class, not simply a required course that students have to take. The course recommends a curriculum that fully integrates each of these three apprentices. And at the same time, the same year that the Carnegie Report came out, the national clinical faculty came out with another book of recommendations on legal education called Best Practices for Legal Education, a Vision and a Roadmap. Best Practices emphasizes the value of pedagogy that blends the theoretical and the practical, what they call context-based education, something we're always familiar with as well. And so what both of these reports recommend, and what faculty at a number of schools have begun to do, is to integrate these principles and recommendations so that we provide learning opportunities for students to practice expert performance and to give those students feedback so that they can improve their performance. Now, I want to take what may seem like a detour, but it actually is not, and that is to talk about three stages or events in my own life that were important in my development as a writer. The first one was in grade 6. And this, for each person in the room, I think will ring true, even though the experience is slightly different. It was the moment where you realized that you were a good writer and that that was going to be valuable. And for me in grade 6, it was verified by the fact that 2 out of 3 of the essays in my teacher's book were mine. Fast forward, thank you. Fast forward for a long period of time to the point where I was practicing law after graduation. I was fortunate in that I was working with 4 excellent attorneys, and it wasn't that there were only 4 out of 100. There were 4 attorneys and myself who I joined. And the practice in our office, we mostly wrote appellate briefs in employment discrimination cases representing plaintiffs, was that when you wrote a draft of a brief, you made 4 copies, and you gave it to each of the other attorneys in the office and said, comments. We know that our hoped-for comment in our heart of hearts is, it's perfect. Don't change a word. But our brain says, get over it. You know that your work will be better if you get comments from your colleagues, because they will help you see things that you can't see in your own writing. And then the third thing that I did, which made a very significant difference in my ability to write, was to teach writing. One of the scholars that I want to mention in a moment says if you want to learn how to do something, then teach it. And although it seems contradictory, in fact, for those of us who are teachers, we know how true that is. What I wanted to talk about was the value of using peer review as a teaching technique and as a way of integrating the second and third stages that I mentioned to you, which is working with colleagues and teaching. I have 2 major goals when I use peer review with my students. And the first goal is to teach students to be good colleagues. Law schools are competitive and individualistic, and legal practice can be competitive as well. But it is often collegial because people must work in teams and work collaboratively. My second goal is to teach students to be good editors of their own work, and to do that by editing someone else's work and applying those skills and those intuitions that they have learned to become good editors of their own work. There are a number of scholars of composition theory that have been important in our understanding of the value of peer review, and I want to mention just 2 of them. One of them is Peter Elbow, who is the director of the writing program at UMass Amherst, the author of Writing Without Teachers, which in some ways is a title that makes me a little nervous. And another of his texts is Writing with Power. The other, and Professor Elbow is very well known across the country, well known to people in this room. The other is Kenneth Bruffy, who is someone whose work I heard of in the first ALS conference that I ever went to. He's a professor at Brooklyn College and the author of a short course in writing. And for both of these scholars, writing is social and collaborative. The principles that I learned from Professor Bruffy, and he had a very significant influence on my teaching by introducing me to the concept of collaborative learning and collaborative groups. And I can't imagine now how I would teach either of my 2 writing classes without having students working in pairs or working in groups. In his writing, he says his basic goal is to help students learn to read and write better through collaborative learning. Collaborative learning assumes that readers and writing are not solitary individual activities, but social and collaborative ones. And I think for many people that's counterintuitive. You think of yourself as sitting in a room by yourself, with a pen, with paper, with your computer, kind of suffering on your own. And his view is that that's a part of it. but that really isn't the way that you learn to write and that you write successfully. Professor Bruffy is a great proponent of peer review and peer tutoring, and he tells students in his book, through peer review you learn how to help other students become better writers, and you do that in order to learn how to be a better writer yourself. I mentioned the goal that I have of teaching students to be good colleagues. It may be that he mentions that in his book because he feels he needs to convince students that they are going to gain, not lose, by helping each other. But there's no question that that happens, that students gain tremendously from working with each other. From Professor Elbow, I mentioned two kinds of feedback that he identifies. One is criterion-based feedback and one is reader-based feedback. When he says criterion-based feedback, to me that sounds as if, well, I know what that is. That's what you are doing when you give the students a list of questions that you want them to respond to in order to comment on someone else's work. Well, that's just made perfectly for law school, and that's the kind of feedback that we do. And certainly, the kinds of the criteria that he identifies are very familiar to us. The quality of the content, the organization, effectiveness of language, and usage. I do think that in some ways it's easier for students to give feedback to other students if they are responding to specific criteria. Because left on their own, without guidance, they are likely to be extremely uncomfortable. They are likely to offer comments that are of no value at all because they are trying to be polite. Or they may even turn it to be a mean, nasty thing that they say because somehow it has awoken some tiger in them. And one student, commented, not recently, but for, I was very disappointed in your work. So if we give students a list of questions that we want them to respond to, it helps them focus and it helps them respond in a way that's constructive. But Professor Elbow also comments on the value of reader-based feedback. And when he explains it, I saw, well, he's absolutely right, because he said he thinks this is even more valuable, because that puts you in the head of the person you're writing for. And if we don't talk to our students about audience constantly, then that is not one of the major themes. We are always trying to, when we have them do a writing assignment, first think about the rhetorical situation, the audience, the purpose, and the tone. And certainly, reader-based feedback is a way of having the audience literally respond to your writing. Now, these principles have been established in legal writing courses in different ways, and I want to mention two of them because I think all of you know that we are in Mecca when it comes to peer review, thanks to the wonderful work of Linda Edwards in establishing the advanced writing groups at Mercer, and to Linda Berger, who had written about peer review and advanced writing groups before she came here and is continuing that wonderful work. And so this school really is a leader and an inspiration and a source of tremendous ideas and energy on how peers can be used to educate each other. There are also more modest ways of using peer review. You could simply set aside one class, have an exercise that you have thought through, give the students an exercise, have them bring 2 copies of their work, exchange it, discuss it, comment with each other on the discussion, and then wrap it up. And I won't go into detail because there are many wonderful, helpful reports written about such exercises in class. I want to conclude with a few seconds talking about my own experience earlier in the year, where I think the results were interesting, not completely successful, but as you do this, you realize how you can do it better. I had given the students an assignment to comment on something that they themselves had written on, so they were familiar with it, with a list of questions. And there was a variety in the level and enthusiasm of the responses, and I'll read you just two. I had asked them to review a paragraph with this question in mind and to rewrite it. And the question is, are the facts of your case compared to the facts in the precedent when analyzing each issue? One student wrote, in the third paragraph of your discussion, you should talk about the facts of the Suhey case right after the topic sentence. You did this in the second paragraph of the discussion, and it makes it clearer for someone who hasn't read the case. Also, you say that a sufficient amount of time hasn't passed, but you don't give a concrete enough reason. None of the cases indicates what a sufficient amount of time is. Maybe it would be more effective to talk about what a reasonable amount of time is with respect to these facts. So that's one. The other one is, here's the question again, are the facts of your case compared to the facts of the precedent when analyzing each issue? Yes. It is an exciting way to work with students. It is empowering for them, and it's something that I would recommend that all faculty think about and that students think about as well in terms of the value that it can be to you in developing your skills as an excellent attorney. Thank you.
Our next speaker will also be addressing contemporary issues. Sam Jacobson is from the Willamette University College of Law. She teaches legal research and writing and administrative law. She has written extensively on learning styles and has been providing wonderful materials in that regard, Sam. And learning styles in teaching and in administrative law, fighting corruption. You are in for a treat today because I don't know if you all know, but this is Sam's last year in teaching, and this is her last public presentation. So this is Sam's swan song. She will be addressing paying attention in a multimedia world. Over my 21 years of teaching, I've taken incredible inspiration and lots of hugs and support from all of you in this room. But my day-to-day inspiration has come from my students. One difference that legal writing has with other courses is that I feel I'm completely accountable for making sure that my students master the material. I can't get away with just teaching the class. I have to make sure that they have the material. And if somebody is not understanding, then I have to figure out why. And so for 21 years, I've been delving into the brains of my students, trying to figure out what is going on in there and how can I do things better. Now I live in the forest in Oregon. It's gorgeous. And our road is Dog Central. I think there's a lot we can learn about paying attention from dogs. Continue our pet theme here. Take my dog, Leif. When I have food, his ability to concentrate is beyond amazing. He sits and he stares at my food without blinking, without moving, for as long as it takes for me to offer him some. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, no problem. Nothing breaks the sight line between him and the food. Not scratching that favorite spot behind his ear, not movement, not sound, not another dog, nothing. Then there's our neighbor dog, Sadie. Sadie jumps up on me all the time. And no matter how many times I say no, or how many times I say down, or how many times I knee her in the chest, it's not mean, that's what the dog trainer told me to do, she doesn't get it. And she's bouncing up and down on me like that little mail icon on the bottom of a Mac screen. Some days I have life days. 10, 12 hours go by before I look out my window and I see that the day has passed. But other days are Sadie days.
200 plus email messages, cell phone ringing, landline ringing, text messages, a parade of students at the door, each on a different topic, faculty wanting this, that, and the other thing. I'm doing a zillion things, flitting from one to the other. My late days are immensely satisfying. On those days, I feel deeply engaged in the material du jour and end the day with feelings of accomplishment and mastery. But my Sadie days, fast-paced as they are, and while I may feel amazed at my ability to juggle all of these different things, make me feel like I've accomplished nothing. I'll complain and figuratively pull out my hair. I can't think. What I really mean is that I can't concentrate. My attention has been hijacked, my brain overstimulated. But what if my Sadie days were all that I had perfected? We already see the effects of Sadie days with many of our incoming students. As multiple discussions on various academic listservs reveal, law professors are increasingly concerned about how laptops in the classroom affect attention. Some have banned laptops, others are considering it. So why is this even an issue? Dramatic changes in technology and its usage in the last 15 years may be affecting the way our students have and their abilities to pay attention. Paying attention is a requirement for the cognitive heavy lifting that we have to do for legal analysis. One study reported that 82% of children are online by 7th grade, and that what they're enjoying on the computer are the bells and whistles, the games, the instant messages, the email, the social networking sites. A 2003 study by the Kaiser Family Foundation reported that children between the ages of 6 months, yes, 6 months, and 6 years spend as much time before media screen as they do playing outdoors. A 2005 study by the same group said that children on average, aged 10 to 17, spend 6.5 hours every day using electronic media. When asked how often they use multiple media while watching TV, working on the computer, listening to music, and reading, a third of the children reported most of the time. Given all the stimulation, what's happening when one's cognitive world becomes overwhelmed by disconnected sensorial bites? What effect does this have on one's thinking? Are we rewiring our brains so that the ability to concentrate becomes a lost skill? If this overstimulation generates Sadie brains, what does that mean for law students in law school? How does a Sadie brain learn how to pay attention and how to concentrate? On this I have good news and bad news. The good news is that overstimulation of our brains likely will not change our brains in any fundamental way. While our brains are very plastic, that plasticity does not extend to expanding our capacity to absorb and process information. Studies have been unable to change that capacity in the long term. That does not mean, though, that overstimulation is without effect. Some studies using functional MRI scans show the addiction center of the brain is affected. We literally become addicted to the overstimulation. In addition, sustained stimulation can result in attention deficit syndrome, a temporary condition similar in effect to attention deficit disorder. Symptoms include difficulty sustaining attention, difficulty organizing tasks and activities, being easily distracted by external stimuli, forgetful in daily activity. Because heavy media multitaskers are more susceptible to irrelevant environmental stimuli, they're also more likely to store irrelevant information in memory and then be wrong. The bad news is the same as the good news. Brain plasticity does not expand our capacity to absorb and process information. Our brain is essentially the same as the Cro-Magnon brain of 40,000 years ago. What worked well for hunting and gathering has its limits for the demands of today, both for what attracts our attention and for limits of our attention. Let me discuss each. What attracts our attention? When one of my nephews was young, he had no interest in television programs until a commercial came on. And then he would be glued to the television screen, mesmerized for the next 30 seconds while the commercial played out. So what's with that? As advanced as we like to think we are, what attracts our attention is no different from what attracted the attention of our Cro-Magnon forebears: the novel or abrupt stimuli that could affect survival. While our survival is no longer at issue in the same way as it was for the Cro-Magnons, what grabs or captures our attention is still the novel or abrupt stimuli: the bright color, the beat, the flash, the new smell. My nephew's fascination with commercials then is understandable. Commercials are designed for maximum scene shifting, visually and auditorily, to maintain viewer attention. Viewers have long complained that commercials are louder than the program that they interrupt. And a 30-second commercial may contain as many as 60 scene shifts, visually and auditorially, all designed to hold the viewer's attention. My husband will often watch television while I'm going to sleep, and if the TV is on and my eyes are closed, it's like a strobe light hitting my eyes, but only when the commercials come on. The potential for additional capture with other electronic media is even greater. On the computer screen, we have ads that are blinking or crawling across the screen. We have noises and sounds that announce that if you click on this button, you will be the 1 millionth visitor and get this fabulous prize. Although I have to say I'm a little suspicious about that, because there have been 999,999 visitors at that site for the last 2 years, notwithstanding that they keep asking me to push that little button. All of these attempts to capture our attention wouldn't matter if we could handle them, but we can't. This leads to the next question: why not? What are the limits of our attention? Our brain handles two types of tasks: cognitive tasks and associative or highly practiced tasks. Associative or highly practiced tasks do not require our attention, but cognitive tasks do. We can do multiple associative tasks at the same time, like walking, talking, breathing, but we can only do one cognitive task at a time. Let me give an example. Suppose you're driving and carrying passengers in your car and engaged in a lively conversation, but then you notice an accident up ahead. What's the first thing you say? Everybody be quiet. Because what was a highly practiced task has now become a cognitive task. And you cannot engage in two cognitive tasks at the same time of carrying on the conversation and paying attention to the road. Our ability to do only one cognitive task at a time significantly affects how we can accomplish the tasks that require our attention. The bottom line is, we cannot multitask. While die-hard multitaskers may sputter at the thought, studies indicate that multitaskers take 20 to 40% longer to accomplish their tasks, and in one study, double the amount of time to accomplish their tasks than if they had done them one at a time. And in addition, they made 20 to 40% more mistakes. Why? Our brain can't process two things at a time. So what it does is when we're multitasking, our attention bounces back and forth between the tasks. It does this very rapidly. Each switch takes time, and each switch puts previously obtained information at the risk of being forgotten. The time involved in task switching, plus the forgotten bits, mean that multitasking takes longer and involves more errors. While we may intuitively understand why switching from one task to another would take more time, we may not understand why task switching would cause us to forget. The reason is that our working memory can only hold a few pieces or chunks of information, usually about 7. If working memory is full, every incoming chunk will bump a chunk out if it's not committed to long-term memory. Have you ever walked into a room and then forgotten why you went in there? That's a working memory problem, where a chunk of what you wanted to get from the room was bumped out of your working memory when you started thinking about needing to get stamps at the post office. Task switching becomes even slower when the multitasker is anxious, under stress, or tired. Sounds like our law students. Under these circumstances, goal-directed attention, conscious attention, is significantly reduced, while stimulus-driven attention is substantially increased. That means that the more tired, the more anxious, or the more stressed a person is, the more susceptible to distraction by unrelated stimuli. In addition, our ability to do only one cognitive task at a time significantly affects how we can accomplish tasks that require deep concentration. The reasoning involved in legal analysis is highly complex and requires the greatest amount of mental effort. Conscious, reflective process is essential for legal reasoning. When that conscious process is manipulated, such as with detractors or interrupters, the ability to reason drops dramatically, except on an intuitive level. Effective concentration, then, requires significant cognitive effort, and to achieve that, we first have to be conscious of the stimuli that distract us from our concentration, and then we must protect ourselves from those distractions. When I was in private practice, they were building a 34-story building outside my office window, and I was hypnotized by watching how this happened. I felt like I could have become an engineer to do the next one. I was watching so carefully. And they had the native peoples that have the inner ear that allows them to walk on the high beams without much support, and I'd be fascinated by them. And finally, I had to keep my curtains closed all day because I really did have a job. And it didn't involve building that building. When I'm concentrating and the cognitive juices are flowing fast and furiously, I imagine my cognitive activity to look like the spinning plate guy on the Ed Sullivan Show, which I'm sure most of you don't remember, but this guy would spin a plate on the end of a stick, and then he'd put it on his nose, and then on his forehead, another one on his forehead, and then his shoulders, and his arms, and his hands, and his knees. He'd be wiggling all over. There'd be like 20 plates all spinning around. Then you get interrupted, and all the plates go crashing to the floor. And to get back into the concentration, one at a time, I have to start spinning all those plates again. Lest you think the imagery is a bit silly, studies bear me out. It takes about 20 to 25 minutes to recover from an interruption and get back on task. That is valuable time that will never be recovered. It takes this amount of time because the distractions shift our cognitive attention focus from the sophisticated to the simple. When focusing on a demanding task, the hippocampus, which is highly involved in memory, is involved. But when there's a distractor, the area of the brain involved is the one concerned with rote activity, not high cognitive activity. So what does all this mean for our teaching? To do well in law school, our students must master cognitively sophisticated legal reasoning, something they cannot do unless they can pay attention and engage in the concentration needed for deep learning. What the new literature on attention tells us is that it means at least three things for our teaching. First, it means that some of our students may need to learn or relearn how to pay attention. First, they're going to have to, there are three things that would make them more susceptible to distraction: interruptions, stress, and lack of sleep. On the first one, they're going to have to limit and manage interruptions and distractions. This means no multitasking. And it means limiting the external stimuli that are constantly interrupting. The little ding when you get a new email message, the little buzz when you get a new text message. Second, it means that the students have to manage stress and anxiety. I think it's fascinating that the studies since the 1960s all indicate that the vast majority of incoming law students are clinically depressed and anxious to the point where they can barely think. So asking students to manage stress and anxiety is a pretty overwhelming task for them. And it's something that I think all of us work with, because we know that unless they can think straight, whatever we say isn't going to matter. I'll never forget the student who was so stressed out that I was trying to direct her to the faculty administrative offices, which were immediately across the hall from my office, 6 feet away. She couldn't understand my directions. And you just have to, you almost want to cry. It's like, go home, get some sleep. You know, if you can't understand how to cross the hallway, it's not going to be a good day. And the last thing is getting sleep. We all, I'm sure, survived our undergraduate days with our all-nighters. That's part of the rite of passage. But the studies indicate for every hour less than your baseline of sleep, for me, 8 hours, and if I had my wants, 9, you lose 10 IQ points. Okay? What that means is that the brain can continue to do the associative or highly practiced tasks as the IQ drops, but you can't engage in the sophisticated cognitive activity. That means students can come into class with their laptop and they can basically transcribe the class, but they have no idea what's going on cognitively. Second thing it means for our teaching is that we need to be sure that we're dividing analytical work into discrete cognitive tasks. If we can only do one cognitive task at a time, are we asking students to do more than one at a time without breaking it into separate parts? Students will be more thorough and more accurate when doing one cognitive task at a time. A very simple tool that I use is a T-chart, named because it's a T on a piece of paper. Creative, huh? And on one side, for each point that they're going to develop, on one side they would put explanation and illustration that would help to define that side. On the other side, the explanation and illustration that would help define what that means. That allows them to be much more thorough, because when they're reading through the cases, they're looking for only one thing and for only one purpose. They're looking for, what does this case say about what constitutes a bite? What do these cases say about what is not a bite? Only one thing. And they end up being much more thorough. The third thing that would concern our teaching, it means we need to be sure we're not distracting. So I don't have my girl group up behind me. I don't have my videos. But it is, I think, humor. We can't underestimate the value of humor in managing stress and anxiety, for sure. But some presentations on PowerPoint that might have animated GIFs going across the screen, that's a distractor. That is, yes, it makes you look at the screen, but you're looking at the animated GIF going across the screen and not what is substantive. So we need to think about what we're doing that helps to focus attention rather than distract. To add to what Marilyn was saying, that also is a problem when you have group work. And I found that a group of 3 is really the maximum size, because the minute you get that 4th person, then you get distractors and they don't get the work done. So there's lots of ways we can think about how it is that we have already broken things down. Much of this we've already figured out in the course of teaching. And other things that we can do that can help students learn to pay attention and to do the deep concentration that's necessary to learn sophisticated legal analysis. Thank you.
We look forward to this article for the journal, and even though this is your last year in teaching, I hope it's not your last year in writing. Carol Parker will provide a historical perspective. She's from the University of Tennessee College of Law, is Associate Professor and Director of Legal Writing and Interim Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. She teaches legal process, torts, and healthcare policy. Her scholarship topics have been legal education, legal writing, and torts. Carol's title of her talk today is The Signature Pedagogy of Legal Writing. Carol. Thank you, Robin, and thank you for explaining my life to me, Sam. And thank you, everybody, so much. It is just a joy to celebrate the Legal Writing Institute's 25 years of teaching and scholarship in the journal. The organization has given me so much, and I am more grateful than I can say. I would like to think that I would have moved beyond assigning writing based on 2 paragraph fact patterns set in a hypothetical jurisdiction in which everyone had a cute name. But what I know for sure is that if I did move past that, the journey would have been lonely, and a lot of the time it would have been discouraging. When I think about what I've learned from all of you over the years, trying to distill it, what I've learned about teaching writing, it seems to me that it comes down to the idea that writing is a process and that writing is social. You have given me, drawn from other disciplines and the emerging discipline of our own, theoretical foundations to move from the idea of writing as a product to the idea of writing as a process to the consideration of the reader's expectation from the text and responses to the text, to a real understanding of audience, which I aspire to today. So I'm especially grateful to have this opportunity to reflect on what we've taught each other in this remarkable, generous, creative community over all these years. As a pack rat, it was extremely gratifying and validating to go through my boxes and look at some of the many things, and my urge to tell you each and everything I found is almost overwhelming. I'm not going to. It would be more than 7 objects. So just some highlights. Looking back at the program from that 1984 conference, which I was not in attendance at, but certainly liked looking at the program. There were 4 speakers, as far as I can tell, 4 plenary speakers who addressed 7 different topics. Wonderful topics. What you should know about writing in order to teach legal writing. Still a good question. Learning the law is not learning lawyering. writing for clients, not teachers, approaches to teaching conceptual organization and legal writing, statutory language, ordinary language. By 2008, the conference offered more than 80 sessions, and they couldn't be all plenary anymore, or it would be a month-long conference. And these sessions addressed topics ranging from the YouTube of professional practice, differing learning styles in the classroom, nonverbal persuasion, comparing discourse communities, even to asking whether Colonel Sanders was a terrorist. And many, many more, plus poster sessions, popcorn sessions, day-long workshop on critiquing student work, which really has become a mainstay for new teachers and a wonderful contribution of the organization. Looking at the schedule for this summer's conference, which I can hardly wait to attend, the sessions will exceed that number. In recent years, conference programs have identified tracks for new teachers, experienced teachers, technology tracks, practitioner tracks. But still, I look back at the workshop sessions from 1984, and they're as vital today as they were then. Using student conferences effectively, evaluating student papers, teaching students to write persuasively, teaching oral advocacy, teaching style and syntax, using peer collaboration, teaching research strategies, and, my favorite, integrating writing into substantive law courses, a direction that I think we're moving in even more for the next 25 years. So next box, I get to look at the second draft, which has been a great source of teaching ideas for us all. In the pile of documents, I found a copy that looked ditto to me. I don't know if it was mimeographed, but it was not word processed, of the second draft from August of 1988. I can't tell you how many places that must have moved with me, but it's still with me. And it includes an article making the case for writing specialists in law schools, a piece drawing on general semantics to explain how Asahikawa's abstraction ladder could inform teaching of first-year legal writing. It included an excerpt from Richard Newman's then forthcoming textbook in which he explained the structure of legal argument. This second draft newsletter was a foundational document and a wonderful thing to find in a box. Now notices of themed issues of the second draft come to me through email. I can access them on the web, and they focus on topics such as teaching with technology, and there'll be numerous articles telling me exactly how to do it, asking questions that move me far beyond anything I could ever have thought of, teaching to different learning styles, and that of the most recent issue, teaching implicit reasoning. And finally, the idea bank, which when I first encountered the idea bank, I thought of it very much as a Christmas cookie exchange. This is great. I only know how to make one kind of cookie, but now I've got 12 kinds. A lot of the documents in the early days looked very much like my two-paragraph hypotheticals. By 2008, the assignments posted in the idea bank nearly all comprise multiple authentic documents and include very sophisticated teaching ideas. And I realize as I'm looking at the idea bank now, and thank you for the idea bank, is that we've developed a signature pedagogy of legal writing. I'm drawing, of course, from the language in the Carnegie Report, which defines signature pedagogy as practices that serve as primary means of instruction and socialization, that build bridges between thought and action, I'm paraphrasing, to provide and prepare the mind for practice, rather, by which professional schools induct new members into the field. The Carnegie Report identifies the case dialogue as the signature pedagogy of legal education. This is Professor Kingsfield. The dialogue is entirely focused by and through the instructor, set in a competitive context to teach processes of analytic reasoning, doctrine, and principles. The report notes that there are two missing elements in that pedagogy, that of context, clients and roles, and also ethical substance necessary to building professional identity and purpose. In discussing a signature pedagogy, the Carnegie Report identifies dimensions as the observable behavioral features of the pedagogy, their theoretical bases, the values and dispositions that the behavior models, and finally its complement, the absent pedagogy that is not or is only weakly engaged. And that I find the most intriguing of all. The shadow pedagogy discussed very briefly in that section of the Carnegie Report is the clinical pedagogy. That's the shadow, a weakly developed complementary pedagogy whose marginality in law schools is striking. As I said, I'm going to argue that we have a pedagogy of legal writing, and the hallmarks of that pedagogy are authentic tasks of an appropriate level of difficulty undertaken in a collaborative setting, guided by a more advanced learner, by way of an iterative process that includes frequent feedback and opportunities for revision. This pedagogy reflects an awareness of the role of writing in constructing thought and of the ways in which writers may translate that awareness into deliberate communicative choices that service their rhetorical purposes. Doesn't that sound great? In the context of the signature pedagogy, the theoretical underpinnings explain the nature of the bridges by which students cross between thought and action, that is, the construction of meaning and the deliberate shaping of communicative acts within social contexts. These theoretical underpinnings have been discussed at length by scholars in this room. Very briefly, composition theory, the new rhetoric and social discourse, learning theory, which is largely parallel to the composition theory, particularly cognitive theory, developing schemas within the domain of law, and constructivist theory, creating understanding by acting within social contexts. We also draw on research and expertise, in particular the idea of deliberate practice. Wax on, wax off. The Karate Kid, in case you... And here is our signature pedagogy, which I celebrate. What is its reach? It was developed, I think, in developing the traditional first-year courses. But certainly, this pedagogy has moved beyond those first-year traditional courses to an advocacy context, to transactional contexts, to first-year subject areas emphasized in legal writing classes. Law review literature shows us models from civil procedure, from specialized legal writing classes in intellectual property, family law, health, or public interest, and into upper-level courses which have a doctrinal focus. The early proponents, such as Philip Kassam, talking about relatively modest approaches, including perhaps a 10-page analytic paper from a defined universe of authorities for a constitutional law class, and discovering that students learned more about constitutional law when they wrote an analytic paper delving into a problem. Again, examples gleaned from the law review literature offer us lots of models. Skills-focused classes which are set within a context of a doctrinal course, consumer bankruptcy context, stressing authentic contexts and tasks, such as using a practitioner book on consumer bankruptcy and working with forms to produce a portfolio of writings such as letters, settlement agreements, discovery documents, pretrial statements. There are examples of doctrine-focused courses that bring in the legal writing pedagogy to teach analysis by way of the forms and norms of the profession. And certainly there are the fusions. There are practicum courses in which the doctrine is enhanced by practical applications, perhaps in a team-taught context. And I would love to tell you about every single one. This is the pack rat coming out in me, and I cannot. And finally, clinical courses that have a focus on writing. Looking at the writing that is produced in the course of
representing a live client and incorporating drafts, feedback, and rewriting of documents prepared in that representation in a number of settings. While Robin's informal survey indicates that only a handful of law schools have, and it's a small handful, have formally adopted writing across the curriculum, the respondents do note that writing tasks are being assigned in increasing numbers of doctrinal classes in a variety of forms, including the ones I just mentioned. Even in the schools that have adopted a writing across the curriculum approach, the forms are different. For example, one school requires that every course in the curriculum include some type of writing, with very little requirements beyond that. Every course must have some kind of writing. On the other hand, there's another, and I'm trying not to name names, writing across the curriculum, writing the discipline program that has evolved to include writing assignments in all required upper level courses and participation in a law firm program in the third year, which requires writing within a social context. And finally, a third school that uses writing across the curriculum participates in a university-wide effort and draws from the other disciplines to support and deepen the learning of learning concepts and course material. What if, and this may be a return to the land of Oz with the Munchkins and the fictitious jurisdictions, but what if the signature pedagogy of legal writing became the signature pedagogy of legal education? What would Oz be like? I don't think it's entirely far-fetched, a little far-fetched, but I don't think it's entirely far-fetched to imagine a contextualized experiential learning model involving writing throughout the curriculum as the dominant model, for several reasons. First, is demonstrated by many people in the room who identify themselves as teachers of legal writing and research, but who teach doctrinal courses, or courses that would traditionally be defined as doctrinal courses. And there are others who consider themselves deep down to be teachers of doctrinal courses, who nevertheless teach courses that have writing in the title. That's certainly one piece of evidence of movement. Some others, I'm wondering whether the adoption, should it happen, of the ABA's Student Learning Outcome Subcommittee's draft standards concerning outcome measurements could also point that way. The idea of articulating the professional skills that students should learn in our courses, designing curricula to serve those goals, and assessing students' progress by way of rubrics that refer to those goals, and then sharing that evaluation with students, are not new ideas to us. Neither is the idea of using learning portfolios as a means of both formative and summative assessment. We've been moving along those lines for quite some time. And those are offered as a good, or one example, rather, of outcome measurements. As has been true for many, many years, but seems to be increasingly true, law firms seek to hire graduates who bring strong professional skills as well as intellectual prowess. If the signature pedagogy of legal writing serves that need, that's additional support for the notion that it could one day become the signature pedagogy of legal education. Finally, the idea of clearly articulated goals linked to assessment measures is consistent with the learning expectations of just-in-time learners. And also consistent with the idea of tell me what I need to know and now I will pursue that idea. That also would be served by legal writing pedagogy. According to the recent survey data, a majority of respondents, vast majority of respondents, say that at least some of their doctrinal courses incorporate writing. Depending on the year, between 2 and 4 schools will respond that all upper level courses must include such a component. And somewhere between 7 and 16 schools responded that none do over the past 10 years. But the rest, and that's 170 in 2008, answered that some do, with the average percentage hovering between 20 and 24% of the teachers at each school. So there's a core group, but it doesn't seem to be expanding rapidly over the last 10 years either. But nevertheless, what would the profession look like if today's shadow were tomorrow's signature? What would be the shadow? Would we be urging the teaching of doctrine across the curriculum? Maybe. What might be lost? Would we be sacrificing the knowledge base necessary to ask the right questions? A notion of legal literacy. What is there in Professor Kingsfield's model? Or is he simply the guy behind the curtain with a pillowcase full of trinkets? I think there's a balance. I think that's what we'll find. But the question that we all need to ask, and it is so exciting to ask it, is how will our teaching methods develop to best serve the profession over the next 25 years? Thank you.
Now we have time for questions and answers. Any questions? How soon? When is the deadline? I think it's January and February. Yes.
I have a question for Marilyn.
Yes.
Do you find it difficult to evaluate your students individually when you have them, especially talking about the first semester and second semester basic legal writing courses? Do you find it difficult to evaluate them individually when they're working in groups?
The work that they do in groups is not work that is part of their grade. Although I don't know whether anyone has done group work where it is part of the grade, and I see nods, so why don't, if those people in the audience could answer the question. Linda and Terry?
Well, the advanced writing groups at Mercer are collaborative during the entire year, and the brief is turned in at the end of the year for a grade. And so the 6 students who are in that group all semester long are working together on that grade, and the key there is that the required grading curve does not apply. So they don't have to be in competition with each other. So that's kind of the extreme on the edge of full collaboration and full grading. But the key there is they don't have to feel all along like if they give a good suggestion to their neighbor at the table, that that's going to somehow adversely affect their own grade.
And they each turn in an individual brief?
Yes.
Sue, your hand was up a minute ago.
Yes, I had a question for Sam, because I think that the research that you were talking about is fascinating. And what I would love to be able to do is find a way to deliver that information to my students whose addiction centers are, really loving what they're doing with this multitasking. And they're almost, I think, arrogant in their feeling that they can do it all. And so I would love any suggestions on how to persuade my students that it really is too much for them and that they're really sort of damaging their own cognitive capacities when they're doing this. Not permanently, as you said, but at least for the task at hand. So any suggestion on that would be great.
Well, I think that the law school experience helps them figure that out because they get so lost. They'll think they've read material, they go into class, and they've missed a lot. They think they've done great on a memo, but then they get back a C or C+. So they're missing a lot. And I have always been fascinated by the discussions on the listservs because the greatest way to get people away from technology is to have them fully engaged in what they're learning. And so using group work and other things where they're accountable to their peers, where here's the problem you discussed, and we're going to come back to class as a whole, that starts breaking them away from the media, which is highly addictive. And we all know this. When we're tired, there's nothing more pressing than getting that new email from Coldwater Creek. And when they can have the experience, a guided experience of deep learning, then they'll know that that's what they have to do to replicate it. And what I find with my students is that about the 4th week, they really start getting in a groove, and they've identified what stimuli are distracting to them. They're walking around all the time with ear pods on, with quiet music or whatever, and they're in their zone so that they can concentrate.
I'll give them a copy of your article.
Great.
I have a question for Carol, and I'm really taken by this description you had of the shadow and this provocative question of what would be the shadow of the future. And I'm seeing a moon and the phases of the moon, okay? And the question for me is, well, once the shadow, it's the new moon, and there's no light. And the other provocative question asks sort of about the full moon, and it's full light. And so then now you're asking about the shadow. And my question is about the moon when it's half light and it's half dark. Because, and I wonder if you have any thought on that, do you see a real chance for law schools where a dominant model is one that really does say there is room for both of these, I know I'm painting with a broad brush here, but for this kind of signature pedagogy that you're talking about that exists now, as well as this kind of what is currently a shadow pedagogy that is more what we focus on, so that there really is a true and healthy kind of balance, that in law school you can do a lot of the theoretical kinds of work if you want, but it's not overloaded on that, and that we truly offer for all law students in this country a really good, thorough set of experiences, if you've got 3 years to work with, that you're always doing some of that. Do you see that, or is balance maybe not a part of your...
Oh, I see that. And I wish I could say it as eloquently as you have. Yeah, I do think it's possible. I think that we ought to look for it. Anybody else for questions? I don't see a hand up in the back. Did one of the students have a question? No questions from students? I have a question. I'm involved in planning another conference, and it involves trying to bring up our newbies into presenting, our new legal writing professors. And we're encouraging that they present on topics of effective teaching method in legal research environment. What do you suggest for newcomers to our profession as far as topics for presentation? What should they be covering? What do you think would be worthwhile in terms of a teaching conference? I have a feeling Marilyn would say peer review, peer critique.
I would say that new faculty are likely to be people who have just come from practice, and that they can bring some of the things that they have learned in their experience as in a more junior capacity, working with supervising attorneys, playing the role that those of us who've been teaching for a long time have really forgotten because it has been a long time. And they can also bring their insights into modern legal practice. What are lawyers doing now that they weren't doing 20 years ago?
That's a great point. Tell us what they're doing. Sam?
I think the greatest topics are the topics that stymie you as a teacher. One of the joys of being in academia is that you can follow your curiosities. And if there's a problem, like for me being inspired by, I'm not communicating with a particular student, why not? There could be other issues that become stumbling blocks, and you explore them, and those explorations are wonderful topics to contribute. And every person's journey of discovery is a little bit different from every other person, and so there's always a new little twist that someone can add.
Wonderful. Thank you. Carol?
Very much along both lines, really. I would ask, what surprised you? From where you were before to going to the classroom, what surprised you? Or from going to the classroom to practice, what surprised you? And I think that there may be something for them to.
So those
To
are
tell
all good
everyone.
topics for newcomers to our profession. Thank you. And thank you very much, everyone, and to our panel.